agree with, what's it going to cost you to not argue it? Second, be non-judgmental. Because people, here's another guarantee in life. If you start judging them verbally or non-verbally, I guarantee you their shields are going up because you're basically saying, hey, you're not part of my tribe. And so people get defensive and that'll get shields up. Honoring reason, and honoring reason is really where you want to make sure that everything you're saying and doing is congruent with what it is you're trying to achieve. Keep that thoughtful mind engaged. Don't get emotionally hijacked where you're going to let your emotions interrupt what's going on between your brain and your mouth. And so honoring reasons, I'm always asking myself, is what I'm about to do or say going to help or hinder what it is I'm trying to do? And ultimately, remember, what I'm trying to do is create a healthy relationship. Fourth is validate others. Validation, this is just seeking to understand at a deep level as possible. It's not saying you necessarily agree with them, although agreeing with them can be validating, but just seek to understand, especially if you have a different political point of view, on religion, anything it is. It's not that you're seeking, it's not that you're placating them or pacifying them. No, you're seeking to understand how it is they have that certain point of view. The key here is you have to be congruent with, what's in your heart and what's coming out of your mouth. Because if your body language and your verbals are incongruent, you just look like you're full of it. So you have to actually be honest internally about trying to understand them. And finally, the fifth step of step 4 is be generous. Be generous with your time and be generous with your resources. And then finally, fifth step is crafting this engagement. How are you going to put all this together to have a great, meaningful, genuine, sincere conversation and dialogue? And so to do that, the first thing I always do is I'm going to state a very specific validation of a strength, attribute, or action that I've witnessed. In other words, I'm going to always be seeking the greatness in others where their strengths are. So I can always start out with a conversation about, hey, when you did this last week, it had such a great result in this situation. Would you mind sharing with me how you came up with that? Would you be willing to share it with others? And from there, we just have a great dialogue and conversation. There's many other steps to that, but those are the 5 basic, steps I used, what I call the elusive obvious. Like, how do you form a relationship of trust and health? That's it.
I get it. So it sounds like steps 1 through 4 are setting the scene and coming up with what you're going to say, and then 5 is delivery. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. And it seems like, I think...
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Based on what I thought about behavioral analysis, I thought that it would be all step 5. That's probably my romanticizing a little bit of the spy industry, and then a lack of understanding of just how much stuff probably goes on behind the scenes with counterintelligence, and that the tip of the spear is exactly just that. It's the tiny little bit at the end that delivers the message or the blow or whatever it might be, as opposed to all of the work that's gone before it.
You did a great job summarizing it, and you couldn't be more right. I mean, it really comes down to you have to really know people. And how do you know people? And this goes back to a lesson I learned really early on in my career in the Marine Corps. I remember I got ranked last out of all these other officers, and a very humbling moment. And I go up to the guy that's rating me, and I said, "All right, what am I doing wrong?" He goes, "Well, you just need to make it about everyone else but yourself, and be a better leader." And I was like, "Well, I thought I was doing that. What the hell are you talking about? Make it about everyone but myself. How do you do that? What's the methodology? How do you make a conversation about everyone else but yourself?" I didn't understand it. This process, this is exactly this. This is how you make it about the other person. You're finding out their priorities. You're finding out their context. And then how do you put all these things together to talk in terms of them? And, you add these 4 things I'd love to throw into every statement I make is 1, I seek their thoughts and opinions. I talk in terms of their priorities. I validate them non-judgmentally, and I give them choices. When I do one of those 4 things and everything I say I write, that entire conversation is completely about them.
I understand. And I'm going to guess that the science will say that plays into a sense of trust and safety and focus on them as an individual, which I'll presume will probably lower barriers and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So here's the science behind it. We know this anecdotally because when you say, hey, when someone's talking about things that are important to me, I love listening to it. And we've all experienced those moments where we've had these conversations where you said you had to go in 5 minutes, but you're there for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes longer because you loved the conversation. Well, it's because they're validating you. So that's behind it. They did a great study at Harvard back in the spring of 2012. where they actually wired people's brains up. And what they found was, on average, people spend about 40% of their day sharing their own thoughts, opinions, and ideas that they have. And what they're doing is they're testing the environment around them, saying, hey, here's what I think, and here's what I think, here's what I think, here's what I think. Because we're seeking constantly to see if we can affiliate with tribes and affiliate with people. And what they found is when people were sharing their thoughts and opinions and ideas, and those thoughts and opinions and ideas are being validated by others, dopamine was being released in the brain. So the pleasure centers, were firing. Serotonin, oxytocin in the bloodstream. Our pleasure centers are constantly firing when we're being accepted non-judgmentally for those thoughts, opinions, and ideas that we have, because we want to be affiliated with meaningful groups and organizations for survival. So that's the science behind why, when you structure a conversation, dialogue, and relationship like this, it's magic. And the greatest thing too, it's totally genuine. There's no, I'm anti-verbal judo and how to win an argument. There's no strategy on how to do that. It's just how do you get to understand a person and make it about them?
Okay.
Piece of cake.
I get it. I get it. So the first 4 steps that are quite conceptual, I think, must require a lot of research about the person, but to me just seem like spending time under tension. Like, work out what it is that the person wants and how you can speak their language and give them choices and don't judge. But the 5th one, I imagine, requires a little bit more skillfulness.
Well, here's how I put it together. Here's how I generally structure and this, again, I don't have my notes in front of me, going off the top of my head. What I generally do is, again, step 1 is I make a very specific statement of validation of a strength, attribute, or action. Now, that's if I know what one of those strengths are. If I don't, I'm going to be talking to a stranger, do a phone call. The first thing I'm going to validate is their time, because human beings do not have to give me their time. So I'm going to be extremely deferential and gracious for the time that they can give me, and also willing to walk away if they don't want to engage me, because in order to make this conversation about them, you have to be willing to accept their denials of your time. So I start out with that. Next, I'm going to seek their thoughts and opinions about their priorities. That's step 2 of how I strategize. Now, if I don't know what their priorities happen to be at this point, because again, I haven't had any research, because we do this in sales all the time. We do lots of cold calls.
Yeah.
But if you don't know what their priorities are, here's a general priority of every single human being on this planet: safety, security, and prosperity for them, themselves, and their families, because that's survival. And so public safety is one that I'll always go to for the things I was doing. But safety, security, and prosperity, I work with financial companies all the time that sell insurance. Well, safety, security, and prosperity for them and their families, that's a priority. So again, if I don't know what one specific of their priorities are yet, one that I can ask them about and see if and seek their thoughts and opinions on is safety, security, and prosperity for you and your family an important thing to you? And so that's step 2. Now, the third way I do this next is I'm going to validate those thoughts, opinions, ideas that they just shared with me. And validation, again, if I don't understand exactly what they're saying, I'll dive a little deeper so I can get a better understanding. And now, most of the time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to inspire people to listen to our thoughts and opinions, ideas. In other words, what we're trying to impart on them. And I use that word inspire because that's really critical. Something I realized a number of years ago is that there's a big difference between trying to convince someone of something want to listen, because really you really can't convince anyone of anything, because that's about you imparting what you want them to listen to, rather I think of how can I inspire them to want to listen to me, because if I'm thinking of inspiring you to action, if I'm thinking of inspiring you to listen or do something, in order to inspire you to do it, it's got to be completely about you and your idea. So how do I inspire you to listen to my idea? This is easy. I'm going to ask you your thoughts and opinions and ideas about my thoughts and opinions and ideas. In other words, say someone has a certain political point of view, and I say, no, I don't agree with that. Here's what I think. That's me trying to convince you of my point of view, and you're not going to listen. As opposed to, they say the same thing, and I say, wow, I never heard it really quite put that way before. Help me understand. How did you come up with that? And they share the thoughts and opinions and ideas, and I say, wow, I appreciate that. I was curious. What do you think about this? And now I'm seeking their thoughts and opinions about my thoughts and opinions. Mm-hmm. Everyone always wants to plant seeds with people by, giving them thoughts. You don't plant seeds with people by telling them what you think. You plant seeds with people by asking them what they think. And so that's where this part of the process is. I ask them their thoughts and opinions about my ideas. Next, I now ask them, hey, I understand their priorities. I've talked in terms of my priorities. Now I offer them choices of overlapping priorities. I heard you say this, this, and this, and I thought this and this and this. Do you think we might be able to work on maybe X, Y, and Z? And now you're empowering them with choice. And then finally, if appropriate, I empower them with choice about remaining in contact or of assistance. That's it. That's the fifth step. That's how I line it out. And so when I'm talking to someone live, I do it that way. Or if I'm going written, I just make sure that at least every one of those things is in every single statement I make.
And now you've got yourself a spy. Now you've caught a spy, and they're giving up all of the state secrets, and you've got the Wi-Fi password and everything.
Only if it's in their best interest to do so.
Yeah. Fair point. So I wanted to ask about specific techniques that you guys use in the field when time is of the essence. So obviously, when we're talking about this kind of a situation, I'm going to guess there will be a word for it, like a longer game, where you have time to prep, but there must be time. You were in the service. I don't know what particular department you would have been in at 9/11, but there's periods of time where you
I was right in New York City during it. Yeah.
Oh wow. So I mean, well, first off, can you tell us about that? What it was like in the Secret Service when that was happening?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Matter of fact, my next book starts out with my being right there during it. So our office in Manhattan was about 5 blocks away from the World Trade Center.
Oh my God.
And I was on the street with a friend of mine grabbing a cup of coffee, and we heard the first plane hit the North Tower, and we looked up, and it looked so small compared to the size of the building. We thought it was a small plane that hit. And immediately my mind and thoughts were going to, boy, there's no fog in the air. The guy must have had a heart attack. And I went up, my floor where I worked in the building was on the 25th floor. And so I was up in our office looking at the North Tower, again, like 5 or 6 blocks away. The smoke kept getting larger and larger and spread out more. And finally started seeing what you thought was debris, coming down from the floors in the North Tower. And it was actually people jumping, because you started seeing legs and arms flailing on the way down. Oh, wow. And that's when the South Tower was hit by the jet coming from the south. Mm-hmm. And that fireball coming through, as like you're watching a movie, and you're right there. So yeah, because again, I worked counterintelligence at the time, and back then we were all in the same division with the terrorism division, and the entire office, we worked nothing but then terrorism from probably about it was from September straight through to December. I think it wasn't until December of 2001 when we actually had our first day off. We were on shifts of 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 7 days a week for that entire time. And it was a war zone, that kind of exhaustion. Yeah. Because again, that's 12 hours on, 12 off. That didn't count your commute time. And it was exhausting. But what an experience! Matter of fact, the first night, on 9/11, I go down to get my car to go home, and I had an engine from the plane that hit the South Tower about 30 feet in front of me, because I had flown that far north before it hit the ground.
Shit. That is crazy.
Yeah, it was. And so our entire time then was talking to absolutely everyone. You just absolutely, there's so many leads coming in, and you just talk to everyone that might know something. I got involved in so many different interviews, so many different things during that time frame, because every day was a different day. You never knew what you're going to be doing. I was out of the Fresh Kills landfill with a rake, raking for fingers and toes and body parts to try to give back to family members one day, and then another day I'm out at John F. Kennedy Airport pulling someone off a British Airways flight that was a name hit coming in from India that they thought was a terrorist. I mean, you had no idea what you're going to do every day.
Oh wow, that's like the equivalent, the Secret Service equivalent of being a dog's body, I suppose. That like not only you washing the cutlery one day, and then you delivering the drinks, and then the serving the Queen, and then doing everything.
Yeah, it was a jack of all trades for a while, no doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. So, with regards to needing to gain trust or be effective rapidly, yes.
So one caveat I'll put to it: anytime you put a time constraint on having to do something, and you're not having full disclosure of your time constraint, you will be manipulation. And again, that's just the name of the game. I think having a awareness of what you're about to do will keep things good for you, so you don't start rationalizing what the relationship is. Because if you start using manipulative tactics, you don't have a healthy relationship. You have a very short-term, manipulation relationship. And so it's healthy for me to do that. And I also caveat 99.99% of my time, I never had to do that, thankfully. But when doing so, yeah, you can. They're using the same methodologies that I lined out. they're exactly the same. Human beings will do exactly the same thing. Now, when you're gaining information, there's, people ask me all the time about elicitation. How do you elicit information from people? One, you can't do anything without some semblance of trust. And so you will have to develop some semblance of trust. Now, it's going to be one-sided trust, because they're going to be trusting you. And even though you're actually viewing them, not in the same view of, not in the same relationship, but human beings have this incessant need to be correct and be correct. I think one of the easiest elicitation techniques there are that people use pretty frequently is what I call an intentional misstatement. So what that is, say something that you aren't quite sure of, blurt it out loud, ask them, make a statement, and they will correct you. It's a guarantee. Whether you're trying to gain a date of birth of someone, just say, hey, I'm pretty good at this. What are you, born in June? They'll go, no, July. Oh, the 15th? No, the 22nd. I mean, and so right there, I got their date of birth without even asking a question. I made a statement.
Yeah, I can play that through in my mind as well. And my desire to correct you is like coming up as well.
Absolutely. So, by doing that, you get a lot of people's, priorities. You start understanding their intentions, so whatever tidbits of intelligence you've been tasked with getting, you create a strategy about how you're going to make an intentional misstatement about that specific type of intelligence. Because most of the time when you are trying to gather information, and whether you're trying to do, gather corporate information, for takeovers, or, to outbid a client, or whether you're trying to, recruit information for spies, you don't want anyone else to be alerted to the things that you're looking for. Because as I said it earlier, if you ask a question, I guarantee you they're going to think about that question forever. It'll rattle around in their brain. So the trick is, don't ask questions about the things that you care most about finding out about.
Yeah, it's planting a flag in the ground to identify what your priorities are, which is not necessarily what you were after. You wanted theirs.
Right. So, but I'll tell you, my earlier years, I was more into understanding and exercising that. And what I came to find out was I got better and better at getting that, the stronger the relationship and the trust was. So I go for the rapid, as fast as possible trust with full transparency, which gets that trust at that point. And then I just come right out and ask them what I want, and tell them why I need it. And you'd be amazed at how much easier that is.
Can you give us an example?
So, I mean, just probably my last couple of years before I retired, we came up, and I won't give you exact details. But we came up with a situation where we identified an emerging threat, to public safety. And they said, we need to find a source in this area. And I didn't know anyone, but I went to some of my guys that, are my sources of information. I said, hey, we need someone in this area. They said, I don't know. But because I have healthy relationships with them and they have healthy relationships with others, about 2 weeks later, one of my contacts brings me a potential guy, doesn't introduce me, but gives me his website, gives me an email address. And I was like, this guy might be right what we're looking for. And so what I did was I looked at his industry, I looked at, his background, and I strategized and I actually sent him an email. And in the email, I validated his time. Like I said before, I sought his thoughts and opinions regarding this specific industry and the threat it might have to public safety, but at the same time wanted to protect his industry from being shut down if something from public safety went wrong. In other words, I talked in terms of his priorities. I sought those thoughts and opinions, and I said, here's why it's important to public safety, because we want to prevent X, Y, and Z. And I said, would you be willing to have a conversation about this? If not, please let me know, and I'll leave you completely alone. Well, he called me with about, I think, 15 minutes. And I said, hey, Mr. So-and-so, if you wouldn't mind. And he goes, oh, I'd love to help out because of what you said. It makes a lot of sense. I said, great. Would you mind if I signed you up as one of our sources and put you in the intelligence system, and so that people can benefit from your thoughts and ideas, and we might protect those people? And he goes, okay. And there you go. That's as easy as it is. It wasn't using any spycraft subterfuge. It was like, hey, here's how you can be a source, and here's how you can help, protect people. Again, what are people's general priorities? Safety, protection of themselves, their families, and their well-being.
What I like about the approach that you're describing here is that it does come from a place of virtue. For the listeners who are regular, they'll know that we're big fans, and as far as I'm concerned, truth is a superpower. One of the main reasons that I like trying to tell the truth as much as I can, although I'm not always perfect at it, is that by telling the truth, you never have to remember what you said.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, I went through undercover certification course years ago, and they said the same thing. You know, you have only so many lies you can tell, and then you got to the more lies you tell about who you are, the more you got to keep track of, because once they're out of the bucket, you can't bring them back again. And so I just got in the habit of not lying, and it was so much easier. I just don't lie. Now, if I can't share something with you, there's a big difference between lying and not sharing something. And if I can't share something with you that you want to know, I apologize and tell you why I can't share. Because again, I have transparency.
Yeah, there's a difference between, as Sam Harris describes it in his book Lying, he says there's a difference between lies of omission and lies of commission. And I think
Yeah.
that's identified quite nicely there. So we've talked about being on broadcast. What about when you're on receive? Are there some strategies that people can use to identify people that are untrustworthy or people that have an alternative agenda? And you watch these programs like Lie to Me and stuff like that, where you've got these
Right.
incredibly proficient guys. For anyone who hasn't seen it, the main protagonist is able to detect a modicum of disgust at his stepmother's death, and that means that he did it because his eyes flicked up and to the left, and all of this kind of crazy stuff. I'm going to guess that the level of fidelity is not quite that high, but that there must be some sort of guys in the service who do have some pretty crazy skills like that.
So I'm very good friends with a few of them. One of my best friends is Joe Navarro, world-renowned body language expert, and he will be the first to tell you as well. The best people in the world, including Joe, can only detect deception 50% of the time, 50% accuracy, using nonverbal detection alone, because it simply doesn't work. Because what you do is, if you're going to use nonverbals, and and what you're looking for is, you're not looking for deceptive indicators. You're looking for stress indicators, because lying is stressful, but also remembering negative thoughts and events can be stressful as all. And so our nonverbals will indicate comfort from stress. And so I'm looking for, am I causing comfort? Am I causing stress? But again, that's a whole separate topic to get into. But basically, as I heard you ask the question, I get this asked a lot too. How do I make sure I'm not being taken advantage of, or I'm not being manipulated or attempt to be manipulated? Correct?
Yes.
This one is really easy because I get this a lot. So someone will say to me, "So Robin, what do you do if someone's trying to manipulate you?" And my first response when someone asked me that the first time, it kind of befuddled me, because I said to myself, "Wow, it's never happened." And they said, "Well, how does it never happen?" I said, "Well, this is easy, because if I'm always looking for a healthy relationship, and healthy relationships are based on open, honest communication, transparency. If you are actually communicating something to me that I don't understand because there's omission or there's blank spaces, and I ask you a question for clarification, transparency, and you don't give it, I just stop engaging you, because you're obviously not looking for a healthy relationship, and it's okay with me. Again, I don't hold resentment against it. I just understand that, all right, your agenda is different than mine, and if I'm looking for transparency, you're not willing to give it, then I'm not willing to keep engaging with you." And so my only advice to people is, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. If you don't understand something, if people are talking fast, or they're using words and terms or situations you don't quite understand, ask for clarification.